Hello, hello, and welcome back to this week's episode of Embodied Divinity. Sitting here with my friend Igor, we are going to talk all things daddy issues and the father archetype. Igor is just like an overall incredible human being. He has a way with words that really pull people into different archetypal experiences, and his work in psychotherapy with his clients and the beings who choose to work with him is absolutely life-changing. So you can find all his links and every way to work with him below wherever you're watching this. But for now, let's just chill and have a good time and talk about daddy issues. Welcome, my friend. How are you?
I am very good. It's good to see you again. It's been like at least a year, maybe more that we talked. Yeah.
Just over a year, smidgen.
Yeah. I appreciate you making the time because we're obviously in different parts of the world and it's morning here and it's evening there. And I know that when I was trying to book this call with you, all that was available was like 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. I was like,
I
how
don't
did I
like to
even do
work
that?
past noon. You've got me working 7 hours late today.
I'm sorry, I appreciate that. And
It's
um
great.
yeah, if I ever do my podcast, we'll switch it around.
Okay, deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's just start this conversation off by I would like to know what like the number one theme you see present in today's world regarding like the father archetype and some of the deeper woundings that come along with it.
Number one. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to like say one's more than another, but I mean, I see the father as something that is been like really ostracized and demonized, the father role and the father archetype out of the collective energetics and the family energetics. So even if you look at pop culture and you look at movies and stuff like that, I mean, the father that's being shown there is either somebody who's abusive and reprimanding and shameful and toxic in some way, where the virtuous others are trying to get away from from him, or there's usually like a goofy kind of father that everybody kind of steps on and makes fun of and that sort of thing. So I mean, that to me, that's in a way a reflection of some form of, I would say, anti-patriarchy, but there's a specific slant I would say that's very anti-fatherly. And I see this in a lot of clients in the family systems. I saw it in my own family system where the father archetype, the father role itself, was very ostracized and shut out, was banished, the whole family system was anti the father role. And so when the father role is not honored, the father energetic is not within the family system. And so his gifts are not brought into the family. And so then of course you're going to have a lack and father hunger, and specifically the elements of the father, the medicines that the father brings in, which are things like boundaries, things like structure, things like protection, things like anything to do with being able to manage the psyche, right? So any kind of discipline, for example. So when that energetic is missing out of, let's say, a child's psyche, there's a problem with boundaries. There's more of a comfort with being in the feminine and in the emotions, in the flux of movement of energy and being, let's say, free in life, so a person can flow easily, but there's nothing to direct it, no ability to be able to channel it in a specific direction. And so the person tends to go everywhere. And that means externally, but also internally within the psyche, no ability to self-manage and self-regulate. And so the emotions can go everywhere, the mind can go everywhere, the spirit can go everywhere. And so when we look at things like ADD, sometimes I'll have people who have been diagnosed with ADD. And what I find is like it's a really ungrounded, undisciplined, unstructured psychology. The mind is just hyper. It's everywhere. There's no discipline. There's no boundaries. There's nothing, no ability, no anchor within the self to go, hey, here, now, stop. Let's just ground. Let's focus. Let's still the mind. There's no ability to do that on the psychological realm and on the emotional realm. And it is the father who brings that in, because the father, let's look at it archetypally or societally even, The father comes into the room, into the house, and the kids are running around, and the mother might be overwhelmed, and everybody's pulling in different directions. I want to do this, I want to do this, that. And it's the father that goes, hey, this is what we're doing. I'm corralling everybody, the whole kingdom, the whole household, the whole village, into a specific type of purpose. And I'm setting the boundaries that nobody's pulling left or right anymore. We're all aligned and going into this one direction. Same thing happens within the psyche, intra-consciousness. And that is the father archetype. So when I work with people and we work on, let's say, resistances towards the father archetype that maybe they inherited, or as part of the cultural rhetoric against the patriarchy and therefore masculinity and all versions of it, which includes the father. When we work on that, we introduce the father archetype, we welcome and we celebrate him, we honor him back into the psychology on the spiritual level. They begin to access those codes. They begin to tap in to these gifts. Sometimes it comes through as a transmission where I kind of tend to step into their field, and let's say they're bouncing all over the place, and bring a really strong energetic of holding them. So they experience what's it like to be really held between here and here, not to be able to just jump anywhere, kind of thing. And so that begins to settle into their system, and they're able to integrate that father aspect consciousness. So uh, I'm kind of going everywhere myself in that dialogue, just as an introduction to what the father archetype, how I see that as a gap within society and within clients that I see.
I think you bring up a really fascinating point. From my personal experience, number one, you're so right. We have very few films or social campaigns or songs or any sort of external media that represents a healthy masculine or a healthy father archetype. And I know in my own personal experience of growing up with a very passive father and a very emotionally unavailable father,
Mhm.
for me, like dating, parenthood, me being an only parent, having to play both roles as well as I could, I had no model. I couldn't find it anywhere in the world either. Like it was something that I had to like completely shatter and rebuild within myself. And if there was anything growing up, a movie or a poem for God's sake, or anything I could have found that told me what that really healthy, structured masculine love looked like, I think it would have changed the trajectory of my whole life. And it's just it's such a funny thing what we're projecting in society and how we're keeping the cycle going over and over and over again by really just denying the masses a model for what these healthy archetypes look like.
Absolutely. And I think that's, reflective. I mean, the need, right? The soul need for that continues to be there. And so as a child who doesn't have a father, a masculine figure, and continues to push and to try to find the masculine figure, they try to push and tantrum to try to meet that boundary. Like, where is the boundary of where my energy can go and where it has to stop, right? Because when I do that in my consciousness, I know that, oh, okay, here's me and here's me also. This is where I end and where the world begins or where somebody else begins. If that's not there, well, I'm leaky. I'm everywhere. I'm enmeshed. I'm engulfed. My connections are codependent. My relationships are engulfing and enmeshed. I've got no directionality in life. I'm getting lost in the freedom and options, which is not actual freedom. That's not freedom. Freedom without boundaries is being lost in the sea of it's lost in the tyranny of options and of boundarylessness. The father also is the aspect that creates the egoic structure, helps to create the egoic structure. If he does not, then again, essence that's connected to the mother and the emotions, they're everywhere. When a child's born, he's connected completely to everything and specifically to the mother. There's no boundary there. And so a lot of kids will grow up still connected to their mother. And then they begin, in order to try to compensate for a lack of father coming in and separating the child from the mother, they start to do it themselves. And the way that they'll do that is unconsciously. They don't realize it, but they'll start to resent, let's say, the mother, try to push away, try to say she's too grasping, too clinging, too in their life. And then they'll because the umbilical cord is still there, psychically speaking. And then they'll find a woman and reattach the umbilical cord to the woman, and then start to fight against that, trying to claim their independence. So it is the father that steps in, cuts the umbilical cord, and activates the will in the same place of the umbilical cord. The will is the masculine. It is the self-fathering, the choice to be able to choose where you go, who you are, where your boundaries start and end. So there's a lot of problems that I can see in clients who haven't had that father figure. You know, like yourself, maybe the father hasn't been strong enough in their own fatherhood and masculinity, but also, in other ways. And when the father is not there, for example, at all. And so they just happen to just be them and the mother doesn't know what she's done wrong, understandably so. She's done everything she can. But the child begins to resent to compensate for a lack of the father. So it's an epidemic, I would say. And so what happens is the soul continues to yearn for the father, doesn't have it, begins to project it on to the powers that be. Authority, right? Authority also is the father. And so it becomes either a religious authority figure, or more commonly in our secular societies, it's the government, right? But then the government is doing, let's say, detrimental things, and they begin to have an antithetical, that's the right word, relationship to the father figure, to the government. Now there's the conspiracy theory. So a lot of people that come and will hold conspiracy theories are actually a father issue going on. Um, and so then they have a rebellious ego in relationship to the father figure. Coming back to this structure, this idea of structure, the child is born as essence, as softness, as vulnerability, as tenderness, as emotionality connected to the mother. At a certain point, they need to step out of what you and I know as the underworld, behind the veil, the essence, the etherealness, and begin to grow a skin, a psychic skin to hold all that in life. That is the ego. That is what we call the ego. That is the container for the essence, which needs to have a shape. It needs to have boundaries. It can't be limitless. We're not in space anymore. We're not in etherealness. And that's where the father is so good at stepping in. Not so good. It's essential. It's mandatory. And go here, takes the hand and pulls the child into life and gives them boundaries. It says, this is where it has to stop and end. And this is who you are beginning to become. Um, the other thing about the father that's really interesting, well, if you don't mind, I'm just going to keep going here while this is coming to me. The other beautiful thing about the father, and is absolutely imperative, is the ability um, to witness. And in witnessing, when the father witnesses deeply enough, what the father witnesses deeply enough, the child then becomes. They see themselves as the reflection of that. If we look at it mythologically, God, as embodied through the father, there's the mother, the goddess, and the father, God. The child looks, archetypally speaking, at the father as God on some level. What the father sees in him, what he witnesses, the child kind of sees themselves through that gaze, because, oh, that must be me. If that gazing is missing, who are they? They don't know who they are. They stay in that kind of, oh, I don't know, maybe I'm fluid. And we do see this fluidity of self in gender in all sorts of different ways in society. There's no sense of self, a strong enough sense of self. If you look at tribal cultures, ethnic cultures, they had these rituals when the child was coming of age. They would stand in the middle of a circle. There would be elders around, masculine elders, and they would look at the child and say, I see the power of the tiger in you, let's say. And that child would receive that as part of who they are. They would activate that aspect of themselves, and they would grow an ego around this, a personality around this in the village. So coming back to what happens now, if the father is in their own twists, in their own wounding, and they're projecting, I don't know, shameful aspects. Oh, my child's not good enough. That's what the child takes in. And they develop an ego and a personality that is, I'm not good enough. So the father his clean form, in his clean consciousness, is gifting of the persona and personality, or if he's not there, the child does not grow a strong personality in this world. A lot of my work is based on that type of witnessing, that deep kind of witnessing where the person is kind of like in unworthiness or an uncertain sense of self or a million other things. And the ability for me to just to sit there, to really see it and to feed it back to them in being, but also in word, allows them, I can see how they begin to step into that, to concretize that in their personality. Um,
Yeah.
I've gone many different places, but yes, it's the father. I'm passionate about this because this is something that I, channeled through. It just became a set of activations, initiations, transformations, and I started writing a lot about it. I'm sure that you saw at some point, and um, yeah, it's a big part of what I offer, because I think that a lot of healing is very feminine in its nature. There's a lot of holding, there's a lot of empathy, there's a lot of compassion, there's a lot of opening, surrender, melting of rigidity into essence, finding more heart, finding more soul, finding more essence, and that's beautiful. But then there's that aspect that needs to come in and then needs to step into life and create out of that essence something, something powerful, something assertive, something that is able to assert boundaries. So have a no in the world. And that is, to me, that is the gifts of the Father. And so that is a lot of the work I tend to do.
I think it's so powerful. Like I love and I see the purposefulness of it, but I also see the change that can be created when we reprogram that part of ourselves and we sit in front of that and we get to experience that. We're talking a lot about society and how we've steered towards this you called epidemic, right? Of like fatherlessness. So how do we begin as society as a whole, right? To start to reestablish some of this father archetypal energy in a healthy way so that it's available to the masses. And how can we and the people listening to this on an individual level contribute to that change?
Um, wow, big question. I mean, that's almost like a question beyond the scope of what I understand, what I'm able to offer, because it's the change needs to be so systemic. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm doing it as much as I can in terms of getting the knowledge that I have out there in my writing and individually in conversations such as this and with my clients, and really with being that, I suppose, in the world too, as much as I can, because I mean, at times I am with hanging out with a single mother who has a daughter, and I can feel it. It's palpable, her yearning towards the father, all because the father isn't there towards me. And so it's that ability for me to be able to step into that in that space, to hear the call, to feel the permission. Because we have this too in Anglo-Saxon cultures. It's like, who are you? You're not the father, don't step into that kind of thing. But on a deeper level, in a communal, in a sacred community, I would say, these roles are always there tangibly. It's like a missing slot. It's like, is somebody going to step in and take the responsibility for this that can, even if he holds it for non-biological children? So, then I tend to kind of take that invitation from the child and tune in and to be able to step in. So for individual men, it's that. For policymakers, it's having that awareness and changing the rhetoric, not to make it so anti masculine, misandrist, but also this understanding of the projection of authority and where that goes and how, let's say, from a conspiratorial perspective, on some level, I think it's true that that authorities and societies and governments tend to capitalize on that. It's like, cool, we'll be the father figure.
Yeah.
We'll tell you how to live life. We'll give you that. We talk about self-governance, and yet we generally employ more feminine empowerment thing about destroying the patriarchy and therefore being empowered, but it's like it's not enough to use the feminine to melt the rigid patriarchal structures. We need something to hold what is left from that, and that is the deeper healthy masculine. I always felt that there's been this rising of the feminine, and um And we've certainly needed that, but we also then need the rise of the deeper masculine to now meet the freedom of the soul, of the child, of the purity and innocence and sweetness that that dismantling has opened to protect it, right? Lots of I'll have lots of clients, mostly women, but some men who come who are incredibly open, but they're so ethereal and they're so vulnerable, and they continue to try to sort of just feel hurt by the density and harshness of this world because they haven't got any kind of skin protecting them.
Right.
So when we have this rhetoric that any kind of skin or container is repression, i.e., patriarchy, we're never going to allow that back in. So often we need to change the rhetoric and understanding of not all boundaries is confinement. It's necessary to take shape in this world. You can't stand up for something if you're in everything. You need to be able to stand in something, make a choice. Choice is also of the Father. It's like going, we're doing this, not everything at the same time. And so there's usually resistances in people to do that, to commit to something, commitment issues, also Father issues, I would say. So, in answer to your question, it's getting that information out there. It's being able to honor the Father in a blessed way, not in a patriarchal, not in a dominant, not in a repressive, not in an abusive way. We need to be able to extend and polarize and open and bless that dialogue in a new direction. And that's what I think I try to do. When I first started to channel it, I don't know if you saw at that time, I wrote, I don't know, I went for about 5 days of just nothing but writing the purity of the masculine father posts without softening it, really being just cleanly assertive. Oh my God, the blowback.
Yeah.
Wow. It was correct. And it was interesting to see because I could feel how that was going to land and the resistances to authority and to claiming to know what's right and to putting it on people. And it's like, but that is what the Father does. That is what God the Father does. He sets commandments. Now, he doesn't do it in a way where it's not within his domain. A father doesn't go into a different family and goes, no, well, now I'm claiming here and the other father steps away. He does it within his domain for people who have opened up and sought his laws, right? If they're just always options, that's not strong enough either. So there have to be this energy of a commandment for a father, let's say, into a child, for the child to really take it in. So it's not passive. It's not passive. It's actually strong and firm, but it's coming from a place of benevolence for the child. Because if the child can take in that as the energy of commandment of the father or of God on some level, the child then grows up being able to command himself rather than, oh, I have feelings and don't know how to deal with them, or maybe we should do this or that. No, he goes, I choose this. And it happens within my consciousness. I choose to not, let's say, deal with the processing of all this stuff right now, rather than be flooded by those emotions. I choose to commit to this one partner. It's a commandment on some level. So it's about being able to demystify and decondition a lot of the the toxic elements that have been bundled with the father, and so throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting perspective too, especially the God the Father part. I think it's interesting, especially where I guess I don't necessarily believe in like a polarized God, more of a consciousness that, creates boundaries. So
Hmm.
that's an interesting perspective for sure. I do, though, see the value in the way that that structure and the guidelines bring us back to our own inner authority and our ability to choose for ourselves based on our own beliefs, moral compass, whatever you call it, right? I think that's a crucial element. And I see what you're saying too. I've seen the unfoldment of it of we had that really toxic feminist movement for a while, right? And now it's softened and we're seeing the dismantling. But I do also see the rise of this empowered masculine and father archetype more and more. Like the more that I look around, I'm seeing such beautiful, empowered, masculine energies, such
Hmm.
and I'm seeing it more and more. And I feel like we're on the brisk of exactly what you were talking about, of that restructuring. And it's going to be this other process of women learning to soften and really having like ease in their feminine energy, whether they're female or male or whatever, but like the ease of the feminine energy in accordance with the rise of the masculine energy. I think it's happening like in real time right now.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, um, I think when I work with people and because there's this, the heart is online and present when the father comes in, I am able to really stand in a very assertive and commanding father energy,
Like,
um, because they have that sense that there's a benevolence, there is the heart behind it. And so having an embodied experience of that is very different to a psychological, people listening to this might hear and it sounds good in theory, but I'm still resistant, don't trust it. It's very different to experience that transmission, being in the presence of someone who is like that with your consciousness, but is also doing it out of a sense of love for you and for your well-being. So I
yeah,
suppose the more experiences people have of that, the more we're going to move in the right direction. But the fact that I was able to kind of wake up to these downloads or whatever you want to call them, these insights about it, and begin to feel it in my own body, in my own consciousness, and really understand and completely flip around how I saw the father, because I was seeing it from that conditioning as well, completely. And I remember just tapping into that and going, holy shit, like we're so cut off from the father, for the father in my family, right? And welcoming that in and shifting that in such a way of welcoming the father archetype itself into the family, and then coming to my family home and noticing how different it was with my father, how less quote unquote toxic he became, because on some level he all of a sudden felt welcomed.
yeah,
That's the thing. It's not about bagging on the father and going, he was toxic. It's also about us being able to see deeper what's going on in terms of the father role in the family. How do we embrace that, celebrate the goodness that is there too?
yeah.
Um, yeah.
I had my own experience with that as I began to feel and embrace more of the father aspect. I saw a huge shift in my dad and the way that he treats
Mhm.
me, the way that he shows up for me. It was really incredible. And
Mhm.
I love what you were saying too about the energy that you bring to the table. We had one session together and we didn't even speak. I just cried because it was like the first time
Mhm.
that I was just like, "Oh, this is what it feels like." And that's all
Mhm.
it took for me was to
Mhm.
feel it and be like,
Mhm.
now I know.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
it can be that easy and there were no real words spoken and it was just
yeah.
an energy, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you're sensitive and open, so it was easy to kind of just feel you there and really just be with you there in a way that felt holding and honoring and firm, in a way that made you feel like, oh, I can trust this. And then that was that silent dialogue between parts of us that was just needing to meet and gave you what you needed. So that's beautiful. And it's usually the most beautiful sessions because they're just so pure,
Yeah.
pure in it. There's no room to misinterpret the words. And but a lot of times I'll find words are needed because they need to unlock gateways of intellectual opposition before the person is able to trust the energy to not be abusive, to be safe, which is understandable because of everything we've all been through collectively.
Speaking of words, I cannot wait until all of your words are written on paper where I can put them on my coffee table and
Oh,
flip through
thank
them.
you.
That's going to be
Yeah.
so amazing. You have
Thank
such a gift with words, but also the ability to hold these different archetypes. And just from past conversations that we've had of the experiences you're having, it's so incredible how experiential it is, how it moves through you, and then how you can take those and really put them out into the masses. So, for anyone listening, besides just following you on social media and reading everything that you put out, how do you work with people?
you. So it's, I mean, I write primarily on Facebook, and people will generally kind of tend to follow me and often will reach out to me that way. Um, so others will do it through word of mouth, and others still will come across an ancient website that I have and find my email on there and connect with me that way. And so I see individuals and I see couples and I see them all around the world, which is, blessed be with the technology that we have that we're able to do this. So I kind of work at all weird time zones because a lot of the clients are overseas, like yourself, obviously. And so um yeah, we tend to find timings that work. I have packages and I have containers, but I also just have individual drop-in kind of sessions for people who want to work with me in a less committed fashion, let's say.
Awesome. I am so excited for people to have the chance to not only just hear from you, but check you out and be more ingrained with all of the things you teach. Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks so much for having me on again. Let's do this in another year or so, or sooner.
Probably.
Thank you, and congratulations on the book again.
Thanks so much. And everybody listening, as always, breathe deep and plan on miracles.